They just ripped the Kremlin's hand out of Europe. A government that spent 16 years feeding intelligence to Moscow, embedded inside the European Union itself, was just voted out. And not narrowly, not with some thin margin. With a supermajority so dominant, it hands the new government the power to rewrite the entire Hungarian constitution from scratch. And here's what nobody is telling you. The man they just removed wasn't just a conservative politician with a strange foreign policy. He was a working asset, operating from inside the EU's own decision-making rooms, blocking Ukraine aid, diluting Russian sanctions, feeding strategic data toward Moscow, and the entire time, European taxpayers were funding him. That ended tonight. But before we go deeper, pay attention to what else just happened, because this story has another layer, and that layer involves the White House. Let me back up. Peter Magyar and the Tisza Party just won the Hungarian parliamentary election with approximately 53% of the vote. Viktor Orban's Fidesz sits at 39%. Voter turnout hit 78%. That is essentially a record for Hungary, and that number alone should make you stop. Because 78% voter turnout doesn't happen when people are content. It happens when people are terrified of what stays if they don't show up. The projections coming in show Tisza on track for 133 seats, 2/3 of parliament, the supermajority threshold, the number that means you don't just win an election, you get to rebuild the entire legal architecture of your country from its foundation. Orbán conceded the same night. He called Peter Magyar directly. Magyar confirmed it publicly. 16 years of authoritarian consolidation ended in a single phone call. 16 years. Now here's what you actually need to understand about what Orbán's Hungary represented, because the coverage you're seeing right now is missing the real picture entirely. For 16 years, Orbán dismantled judicial independence. He captured the press. He rewrote electoral law to entrench his own party. And then he used Hungary's EU membership as a shield, collecting European Union subsidies while simultaneously vetoing EU solidarity on Ukraine, blocking European defense cooperation, and feeding strategic intelligence toward Moscow. Hungary held veto power in the EU Council. A single member state in a consensus-based institution can stop everything. And that is exactly what Orbán did, repeatedly. Blocking EU aid to Ukraine, diluting sanctions against Russia, preventing the kind of unified European response that Kiev needed most in its most desperate hours. He wasn't a politician with unusual opinions. He was a structural asset, embedded inside Europe's own institutions. A veto that Moscow didn't have to pay for because European taxpayers were already covering the bill. That is the intelligence picture, and that chess piece just got taken off the board. Now let's talk about the interference, because this election didn't happen in a vacuum. And the scale of outside intervention in a sovereign European democratic election is something that deserves to be stated plainly. Donald Trump endorsed Viktor Orban, publicly, repeatedly, aggressively. He recorded a video message played at a CPAC convention held in Budapest. His exact words, "I'm endorsing his election. He has my complete and total endorsement. He's a fantastic guy." J.D. Vance traveled to Hungary. He stood on Hungarian soil. He campaigned for a foreign head of state and stated explicitly that he was there to help Orban as much as I possibly can. Marco Rubio visited Budapest and delivered remarks so favorable to Orban that Russian state media quoted them approvingly, describing a golden era of U.S.-Hungary relations. Donald Trump Jr. published posts directed at the Hungarian people, urging them to vote for his father's friend and ally. Benjamin Netanyahu added his endorsement to that list as well. Let that sink in. The sitting vice president of the United States traveled to a foreign country to campaign against a pro-democracy opposition movement, one that stood for EU solidarity, for Ukraine, for the rule of law, and campaigned instead for the continuation of a government that had spent years undermining American allies from inside European institutions. The American Secretary of State delivered remarks that Russian state media used as propaganda, and then the Hungarian people, having watched all of it, went to the polls in historic numbers and voted the other way. That is not just an election result. That is a public democratic verdict on the Trump-Orban-Putin alignment, delivered by the people most directly affected by it, with 78% voter turnout in front of the entire world, and it failed completely. Think carefully about what that failure tells you about American soft power right now. For a decade, the United States built enormous geopolitical leverage on the perception that it defended democratic norms. That perception created trust. alliance cohesion, the kind of moral authority that allows a country to lead coalitions when it matters most. What happened in Hungary is the visible cost of burning that perception to the ground. The vice president traveled to a European country to help a Kremlin-aligned leader survive a democratic election, and he lost, publicly, in front of every ally and every adversary watching. That message travels far beyond Hungary's borders. Orban's final weeks exposed exactly what his government had become. He attempted to manufacture false flag provocations. He claimed, without credible evidence, that Ukrainian President Zelensky was planning attacks on Hungarian infrastructure. His state media ran that claim wall to wall. His supporters amplified it across every channel available to them. Peter Magyar's campaign addressed each of those claims. Directly, methodically, without theatrics. Magyar didn't get louder, he got more precise. Because in a disinformation environment, factual clarity is the most powerful weapon available, and Hungarian voters watched both approaches play out for weeks and drew their own conclusions. Ursula von der Leyen released a statement tonight. Europe's heart is beating stronger in Hungary tonight. Hungary has chosen Europe. Europe has always chosen Hungary. A country reclaims its European path. The union grows stronger. And here's what that actually means structurally. If Tisza achieves the supermajority the projections suggest, Hungary doesn't just shift its foreign policy, it removes the internal veto that has been blocking EU-wide coherence on Ukraine, on Russian sanctions, on defense investment for years. The EU's institutional architecture becomes meaningfully more functional overnight. The single obstructionist node inside Brussels gets cleared. For the first time in years, the European Union can act with something approaching full alignment on Russia, on Ukraine, on defense spending, on sanctions enforcement. That is not a minor diplomatic development. That is a structural shift in the balance of the war. There is one more thing you need to hear, because it reveals the full operating logic of what was attempted here. At Trump's so-called Board of Peace gathering, Trump described his own approach to endorsing foreign leaders with precise clarity. His words, "I'm not supposed to be endorsing people, but I endorse when I like people. As long as it works, it's okay with me. As long as it works." That statement tells you everything. This isn't ideology. This is transactional consolidation. Build a personal network of aligned leaders who won't challenge American executive power, who will provide safe harbor, who will serve, when needed, as vetoes against democratic multilateral institutions. Hungary just rejected that network, disconnected one of its most important nodes from the architecture. And what happens next in Slovakia, in Serbia, inside EU cohesion votes, will carry the fingerprints of what happened at Hungarian polling stations tonight. The crowds chanting Russia, go home in the streets of Budapest tonight are not just celebrating an election result. They are telling you something specific about the direction of history. They are telling you that when a population is pushed to the edge, when they can see clearly what is at stake, they move. In numbers that cannot be managed, manipulated, or endorsed away. 78% voter turnout. 16 years ended. One phone call. The Kremlin's embedded asset inside the European Union is gone. And the question now is what fills the space it leaves behind, and how fast the rest of the network realizes what just happened to one of its most protected nodes. Watch Slovakia, watch Serbia, watch the EU cohesion votes, because this is not over. It is just beginning.